Hi again and welcome to this lecture. Throughout this lecture, we are going to build an application that will migrate all the data inside a text file, as you can see right here, to an Excel spreadsheet. Basically, the application will create the sheet itself, the file, the table within this sheet, the columns and rows. We'll split this data inside the text file using the semicolon as a delimiter. Then the application will apply some styles, some visual styles on our sheet, on our table, and we will have column headers, filters, various colors, row stripes and column stripes as well for better readability of the table. And at the end, the application will identify all the salaries inside the table that are greater than $55,000, and for those particular cells, it will make the text within the cells red instead of the default black, and also bold and italic, so we can have a better view over the employees that have the greatest salaries. Okay, so we will consider this text file right here, which has 7 columns: ID, first name, last name, department, phone, address, and salary for each employee. And then the values for each of these columns are separated by a semicolon that, as I said, we will use as a delimiter when splitting each row of this file. Okay. For now, keep in mind that immediately after this video ends, in the next lecture, you will be able to download both the application code itself and this file so you can work on it and test it as well. So let's start working with this file and let's start the migration process to an Excel workbook. In order to do that, I'm going to open up the Python interpreter. And first of all, as always, we are going to import the necessary modules. So before anything else, we have from open PyExcel, we are going to import a class named Workbook. Next, also from open PyExcel.styles, import all in order to have available all the necessary styles that we will apply on each cell that meets the condition of having a value of over $55,000. Okay, and finally, we also need 2 other classes. So from open PyExcel.worksheet.table, we are going to import table and table style info. Okay, the next step is to open the text file that we've just seen for reading. So I'm going to create a variable text underscore file equals open, and in between the parentheses of open and also in between double quotes, I'm going to enter the full path to our file. So d/excelapp/employees.txt. This is the text file you've just seen. Okay, next we are going to create an empty list for storing the records as a list of lists. So we are going to store all the data inside the text file in the form of a list of lists. So let me create an empty list, records, let's say, equals, open and close square brackets. And next we should make sure that we are reading the file from the very beginning. So text file dot seek of 0, as we already previously did inside this course. Okay, now it's time to have a look once again at our file. And as I said, we are going to split each line in the file by the semicolon delimiter. And then we will append each list generated by the readlines method to the new list called records. So in order to do that, I'm going to write a for loop. So for record in text file dot readlines colon records, the name of the list, dot append. We are using the append method, and in between its parentheses, we are going to enter record dot rstrip of \n. So we are going to strip away any new line characters at the end of each line in the file, and also dot split. And as I said, we're going to use the semicolon as a delimiter. Okay, let's hit enter. And now let's check our list records. And indeed, you can see that we now have a list of lists where each element of the outer list is a list made up of the elements that were previously separated by a semicolon. Okay, so at this point, we've read the data from the file. We have populated this list called records. Now it's time to create our new workbook, since, as you can see right here, in the Excel app folder that I have created, there is currently no Excel file in this folder. Okay, so I'm going to create the workbook right now. So workbook equals, and now we are going to call the workbook class workbook. Next, we are going to set the path or location where we want the new Excel file to be saved. So we are going to create a variable called file path equals, and now I'm going to paste in the path to the file, or actually the location where we are going to store this file. So the Excel app mycompanystaff.xlsx, this is the name of the file that we're going to create. Also, note that we should escape the backslash characters inside the path using another backslash, so we would have a double backslash in order to avoid any conflicts with Python's special characters like a \n or a \t. Okay, so we have defined the file path, the location of the file. The only thing we have to do in order to have our file created is workbook.save of file path. So we are going to create and save the file to the specified location. Now let's check the folder once again, and you can now see that the Excel file has been created, so great job thus far. At this point, we have a new workbook on our file system, and each new workbook created by the OpenPyXL module has by default a single sheet called simply sheet. In order to verify this, I'm going to use workbook.sheetNames, and as you can see, we have a list with a single element, which is sheet. Okay, now let's assume that we want to rename the default sheet to, let's say, employees. In order to rename this default sheet, first we have to reference it, so sheet equals workbook, and in between square brackets we have the name of the default sheet, which is sheet, and now we can just do sheet.title, and now we can enter the new name of this sheet, let's say employees. Okay, great. Now it's time to populate the sheet with the data we currently have inside the records list. Also note that the first row inside the text file, so this one right here, will be considered the table header inside the Excel spreadsheet. And that is just what we want, because we want to have a properly formatted table with a header and then the rows containing the data. Okay, so now we can use this list of lists in order to populate our sheet, and we are going to do that using, of course, a for loop in order to iterate over the entire list. So for row in records, basically for each list inside the list of lists, colon, sheet.append of row. Okay, at this point, we should have the data migrated to the file. However, we want to use this data in order to create a table and then format it using different styles. So for that, we should create a table inside our sheet. In order to create a table inside the sheet, we can just do table equals, and now we use the table class that we imported previously. Inside the parentheses of this class, we enter two parameters, display name, which is a mandatory parameter, equals table, let's say, and this is the most important parameter right here, ref equals, and now we will define the array inside the sheet that will actually contain the data itself. Now looking at our text file again, we know that we have 7 columns and also 11 rows. So that would be columns A to G and rows 1 to 11. In order to define this array inside our code, we will use cell A1 up to cell G11, and that will basically be our table. Okay, of course, if you would have had 100 rows inside your text file, then this array would have been A1 to G100. But in our case, this is the array, so let's hit enter. The next thing we should do is define a style for the table, meaning we can pick one of the default styles and specify the default style name, and also we can specify if we want row and column stripes within our table in order to have everything look neat and pretty. There are multiple default styles for creating a table using the OpenPyXL module, and in order to see all the styles, you can check out openpyxl.worksheet.table.styles. Okay, we got an error because we haven't imported the entire OpenPyXL module, and I'm going to do that right now, since we are in a testing environment anyway. So let me try this again. Okay, and these are all the default table sheets inside the OpenPyXL module. Of course, you can test which style suits your taste and your needs for your table. I'm going to choose one of these default styles, namely table style medium 9, because I like that one. So let me show you how to define the style for the table. We have style equals, and now we use table style info that we previously imported. And in between its parentheses, first of all, we should specify the name of the default style that we want to use. So name equals, as I said, table style medium 9, comma, and we can also add additional options. For example, show row stripes equals true, and also show column stripes equals true as well, in order to have a pretty and appealing table as a result. Okay, so this is the style we defined. Now it's time to apply the style to our table, and for that we are going to use table.tableStyleInfo equals style that we just defined. Okay, and of course we should add the newly created table to our sheet, because thus far we have defined the table, we have defined the style for the table, and we have also applied the style to the table, but at this point the table hasn't yet been added to the sheet. So in order to do that, sheet.addTable, and in between the parentheses of add table, we specify table, which is actually this instance right here. Okay, finally, we assumed that we want the salaries that are greater than 55,000 to be shown in a red font instead of the default black font, and also as being bold and italic, so we can see them better inside the table. For that, first we should define the font and also specify the bold and italic options. In order to do that, let's create font equals font of color. This attribute equals colors.red, because I said that we want to have a red font for these particular cells, comma, bold equals true, comma, italic also equals true, and we want these font settings applied to the cells that meet the condition salary greater than 55,000. Now looking at our data again, you can notice that rows 2 to 11 are the rows containing the actual employee data, and the salary will be the 7th column in this table, which is column G. Now, since we want to take into consideration rows 2 to 11 inside this table, we can use a trick by using the range function to iterate over the cells inside the table inside column G, which is associated with the salary. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a for loop for, let's say, cell number in range of 2 up to, but not including 12. So that would be 2 to 11, as I said, colon. Now we should specify the condition if, and now we are going to use the int function because we will have a string inside each of the cells on column G. And in order to evaluate if the value inside each cell is greater than 55,000 or not, we should have an integer. So int, and in between the parentheses of int, do you remember how we would reference a cell inside the sheet? It would be sheet of, let's say, in between square brackets, we would have B10, for example. Well, in our case, since we are iterating over a range and we want to consider all the cells inside column G, we will have G, the column identifier, and now we will use a string format operator, %s, then we will use the % operator, and in between parentheses, we will use cell underscore number. So first of all, we will evaluate cell number G2 according to this range right here. That would be G and 2 mapped to the value inside the parentheses. Then for the next iteration, we would have 3 extracted from this range. So we would have G3 and so on until this range is exhausted. Okay, so we have sheet of G2, for example, dot value, because we want to refer to the value inside that cell. So if this value is greater than 55,000, colon, then we want to apply this font right here to each particular cell that meets the condition. So in order to apply a font to a cell, we would usually have sheet of, let's say, G10 dot font equals this name right here, font. But since we have an iteration and we are iterating over all the rows, meaning 2 to 11, then we will use the % operator yet again. So %s, and again % and cell number. dot font equals font. So again, we are using this range right here, 2 to 12, which actually means 2 up to and including 11. Then we are evaluating the values inside each of these cells. So if the value is greater than 55,000, then we are applying the font that we have just defined up here to each of those cells meeting the condition. Okay, let's hit enter. And now the last thing we should do is, of course, save the workbook. So workbook.save file underscore path. Okay. Of course, you should remember to also close the file that we used for reading the data, the text file. So text file.close. And now let's go to the file and see if all of our changes, all of our settings have been applied to the file. So first of all, you can notice that the file has been created, mycompanystaff.xlsx. Now let's open the file and let me zoom in a bit. First of all, you can see that all the data inside the text file right here has been successfully migrated to this file, to this sheet, and to this table. The first row inside the text file has been converted to the header of this table. We also have filters available if we want to filter our data. Next, let's notice the style applied on this table. So we have the column header with a color different than the rest of the table. We also have row stripes. You can see that we have alternating colors for the rows inside this table. And also we have column stripes. You can also see that the design of each column alternates as well. Finally, inside the G column, the column containing the salaries, you can see that all the salaries that are greater than 55,000 are now written in red, and the text has also been converted to a bold and italic version of the initial text. Okay, now let's close the file, and I'm going to delete this file, and I'm going to show you the application containing all the code that we discussed inside this lecture. So this is the actual Excel application.py file, in which you will find the code that we just executed throughout this lecture. And as a side note, I have also added some comments in order to have everything clear. Of course, as always, I strongly recommend you use as many comments as necessary inside your code for later reference. Finally, in order to prove that this application works as a whole, I'm going to open the Windows command line and I'm going to run this application. So Python and then the path to the file, enter. And now if we check our folder, the file has been created once again. Opening the file, we see that we have the same result as we've seen before. So our application works correctly. Okay, having that said, I hope you enjoyed this lecture and migrating data from an ugly text file to a clean and pretty Excel workbook. And I hope you're going to find all the skills inside this section useful for your career. I'll see you soon.